Most people assume the World Trade Center reconstruction followed a single master plan, but the reality is far more chaotic. Between 2001 and 2025, the project went through multiple redesigns by different architectural teams. Tower 2 alone was redesigned 4 separate times by different architects, while One World Trade Center was completely reimagined 3 times before construction even began. Buildings were approved, then canceled, then redesigned again. Meanwhile, Larry Silverstein found himself paying $10 million monthly in lease payments on an empty lot, while fighting insurance battles and political opposition. The site today represents the result of scores of compromises between memorial requirements, commercial needs, security concerns, and community input. Understanding this process reveals how complex urban projects actually get built in America and why the final result looked nothing like what anyone originally envisioned. The original vision that never was. When Daniel Libeskind won the master plan competition in 2003, his design promised to transform Ground Zero into something extraordinary. The plan featured a dramatic 1,776-foot spire called the Freedom Tower, with the symbolic height referencing the year of the Declaration of Independence. Cultural buildings, including a performing arts center and museum, would be arranged around the tower, with the entire complex rising from a sunken memorial area where visitors would move upward through increasingly vibrant spaces, celebrating both remembrance and rebirth. Libeskind's renderings showed gleaming towers arranged in a pattern that referenced both the original twin towers and new possibilities for the future. The Freedom Tower would twist as it rose, its crystalline form catching sunlight and casting different shadows throughout the day. Below, the memorial would occupy the exact footprints of the original towers, surrounded by a landscaped plaza that gradually transitioned into busy commercial streets. The plan promised to balance the sacred nature of the memorial with the practical need to rebuild Lower Manhattan as a thriving business district. The architectural vision extended beyond individual buildings to encompass the entire 16-acre site. The transportation hub would emerge from underground like a bird taking flight, connecting subway lines and path trains while creating a soaring public space. Office towers would provide jobs for thousands of workers, their modern designs contrasting respectfully with the memorial's contemplative spaces. Early promotional materials presented this vision as both inevitable and carefully planned. Architectural drawings showed people walking through sun-drenched plazas while office workers moved between gleaming towers above. The message was clear. Ground Zero would become a place where memory and progress coexisted in perfect harmony. Political leaders embraced the plan as proof that terrorism could not defeat American resilience and creativity. The media celebrated Libeskind as the architect who would heal the wounds in Manhattan's skyline. However, the plan immediately encountered resistance from Larry Silverstein, who held the lease on the commercial portions of the site. Silverstein had signed a 99-year lease just weeks before September 11th and remained contractually obligated to rebuild office space. His priorities focused on maximizing rental income and attracting corporate tenants, goals that conflicted with Libeskind's emphasis on symbolic architecture and public space. The developer argued that the Freedom Tower's unusual shape would create inefficient floor plates that companies would reject. He preferred conventional rectangular office buildings that could accommodate large tenants with standard space requirements. This fundamental tension between artistic vision and commercial reality would eventually lead to the 2006 property swap, where Silverstein ceded control of the tower footprints to the Port Authority in exchange for development rights on other sites. This arrangement illustrated how lease obligations and symbolic requirements could not coexist under a single developer's control. The Port Authority, which owned the underlying land, brought its own set of concerns to the planning process. As a government agency responsible for regional transportation infrastructure, the Port Authority prioritized rebuilding the path train connections and subway access that had been destroyed in the attacks. Officials worried that Libeskind's artistic vision would complicate the technical challenges of reconstructing underground transportation systems while building memorial foundations in the original tower footprints. The agency also faced pressure to control construction costs and complete the project within reasonable timeframe. City officials added another layer of complexity with their focus on urban planning and economic development goals. Mayor Michael Bloomberg's administration wanted the reconstruction to catalyze broader revitalization of Lower Manhattan, which had been losing residents and businesses even before September 11th. This meant prioritizing street-level retail, pedestrian-friendly design, and connections to neighboring areas over the inward-focused memorial complex that Libeskind had proposed. The city also insisted on maintaining the street grid that had existed before the attacks, limiting options for radical redesign of the site. Security concerns emerged as the most powerful force reshaping the original plan. The New York City Police Department conducted extensive reviews of Libeskind's pedestrian-friendly design and identified numerous vulnerabilities. The Freedom Tower's location close to West Street would expose it to truck bombs similar to the 1993 World Trade Center attack. The open plaza design would create gathering spaces that could become targets for future attacks. Underground retail and transportation areas would be difficult to secure and evacuate in emergencies. These concerns intensified as other terrorist attacks occurred around the world during the planning period. The first major compromise came in 2005, when security experts forced the Freedom Tower to move 200 feet away from West Street and required a fortified base that would protect against truck bombs. This single change disrupted the careful positioning that Libeskind had used throughout his master plan. The tower's new location altered sight lines across the Memorial Plaza and changed the spatial relationships between all the other planned buildings. The symbolic 1,776-foot height remained, but the tower's meaning as a precisely positioned beacon was compromised. This change created a domino effect that rippled through every aspect of the master plan. The Performing Arts Center had to be repositioned to maintain visual balance with the relocated tower. The museum's entrance needed redesign to accommodate new pedestrian flows around the tower's security perimeter. Underground retail spaces were reduced in size to simplify security screening procedures. The transportation hub's soaring design was modified to prevent it from becoming a symbolic target itself. Each modification required new architectural studies and environmental reviews that delayed the project and increased costs. Additional security requirements continued to erode Libeskind's original vision throughout the planning process. Vehicle barriers and security checkpoints replaced the seamless integration between memorial space and commercial areas. Visitor screening procedures eliminated the spontaneous pedestrian experience that was supposed to guide people through different emotional zones. Building codes were updated to require enhanced fireproofing and evacuation systems that changed interior layouts and architectural details. By 2010, critics noted that Libeskind's master plan existed mainly as a memory rather than a guide for actual construction. The Performing Arts Center faced constant delays and budget problems. Several planned office towers were canceled or indefinitely postponed due to lack of tenant demand. The memorial design had been selected through a separate competition that ignored many of Libeskind's spatial concepts. Today, visitors to the World Trade Center site encounter a collection of individual buildings rather than the unified architectural experience that Libeskind had envisioned. The street grid has been restored largely as it existed before September 11th. The memorial occupies the tower footprints as planned, but the surrounding buildings follow conventional real estate development patterns rather than symbolic arrangements. Only the basic organizing principles of Libeskind's plan remain recognizable, transformed beyond recognition by 2 decades of practical compromises and changing priorities. The Freedom Tower itself would undergo its own series of complete transformation. One World Trade centers 3 different lives. The tower that emerged from this process actually represents 3 completely different architectural concepts, each reflecting the changing priorities that shaped the entire reconstruction. One World Trade Center stands today as the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere at 1,776 feet, but this final structure bears little resemblance to what was originally planned for the same location. The first version emerged in 2003 as the Freedom Tower, designed by David Childs of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. This original concept featured an exposed steel exoskeleton that would be visible from the street, with large diagonal braces crossing the building's exterior in a distinctive pattern. The structural framework was intended to communicate strength and resilience, showing the building's engineering as part of its architectural expression. The tower's base rose directly from street level without setbacks or barriers, allowing pedestrians to walk directly up to the main entrance. This ground-level transparency was considered essential to the building's symbolic function as a beacon of democratic openness. The building's form combined angular geometry with a crystalline crown that would house broadcasting equipment while creating a distinctive silhouette against the sky. Interior spaces were organized around the exposed structural elements, with office floors designed to maximize views of the steel framework. The design emphasized bold symbolism over practical concerns, treating the tower as both a memorial statement and an architectural landmark that would be instantly recognizable from throughout the region. Security experts reviewing this design in 2005 identified fundamental vulnerabilities that made the building unacceptable for construction. The tower's proximity to West Street exposed it to truck bomb attacks, while the transparent base provided no protection against vehicle-borne explosives. The exposed structural system would be susceptible to targeted attacks that could compromise the building's stability. The New York Police Department declared the design too dangerous to build and demanded a complete redesign that prioritized security over symbolic expression. The second version attempted to balance security requirements with architectural ambition through a radical redesign that moved the tower 200 feet away from West Street. This version featured a heavily fortified base rising 200 feet above grade, constructed from reinforced concrete and designed to withstand truck bomb explosions. Above this fortress-like podium, the building twisted as it rose, creating a dynamic form that caught light differently throughout the day. The twisting geometry was intended to maintain some symbolic power while addressing the security concerns that had killed the original design. The fortified base contained no public entrances or retail spaces, instead housing mechanical systems and security checkpoints behind blast-resistant walls. The building's main lobby was elevated above street level and accessed through security barriers that would screen all visitors before they could enter the structure. The twisting tower above featured a glass and steel curtain wall system that would reflect light in changing patterns as the sun moved across the sky. Construction began on this second version in 2006, but the complex geometry required custom engineering solutions that dramatically increased costs beyond what the Port Authority could afford. The third and final version simplified the building's geometry while maintaining the basic concept of a fortified base topped by a twisting tower. The rotation was reduced to create more efficient floor plates that could accommodate standard office layouts. The glass facade was redesigned using conventional curtain wall systems that could be manufactured more economically. The building's crown was simplified to reduce construction complexity while maintaining its function as a broadcasting facility. Interior systems were standardized to control costs and simplify ongoing maintenance requirements. This final design eliminated most of the symbolic elements that had defined the original Freedom Tower concept. The exposed structure disappeared entirely, replaced by conventional steel frame construction hidden behind a standard curtain wall. The building's form became more conservative, resembling other contemporary office towers rather than making a bold architectural statement. The fortress-like base remained, but was clad in materials that attempted to soften its institutional appearance. When OneWorldTradeCenter officially opened on November 3, 2014, the building struggled to attract tenants despite its prominent location and symbolic significance. Many companies remained concerned about security risks associated with working at Ground Zero. The building's association with the September 11 attacks created location stigma that made it difficult to command premium rent. Office floors remained vacant for months as the Durst organization, which co-developed the building with the Port Authority, searched for tenants willing to occupy space in America's most symbolically important office building. The building's early tenants included Condé Nast, tech marketers Wunderkind Corp., and investment firm Energy Capital Partners, but large portions of the tower remained unleased years after opening. The One World Observatory opened on May 29, 2015, providing a revenue source while giving visitors access to spectacular views from the top floors. However, office occupancy remained below expectations, as companies preferred locations with fewer security restrictions and historical association. By 2025, 12 years after completion, OneWorldTradeCenter finally achieved market success. The building's 89th and 90th floors entered the commercial real estate market for the first time, offering office space located about 1,100 feet off the ground with panoramic views of New York City. The Durst organization sought rents as high as $160 per square foot for this space, prices aligned with midtown rates. The World Trade Center office node performed well compared to other downtown areas, with vacancy at 12.7% below the broader New York market average. The tower's success came not from architectural brilliance or symbolic power, but from persistence in marketing the space and the gradual transformation of Lower Manhattan into a desirable business address. One World Trade Center had finally found its identity as a conventional office building that happened to occupy the most symbolic location in American architecture. Yet this single tower represented only one element of a much larger master plan that had promised dozens of other major structures across the 16-acre site. The buildings that disappeared. Several major structures from the approved master plan were designed, funded, and then quietly canceled when reality conflicted with ambition. The Performing Arts Center, Joyce Theater, Norman Foster's Crystalline Tower for 2 World Trade Center, the planned 5 World Trade Center office building, and extensive underground retail spaces all disappeared from the final site despite years of planning work and millions in architectural fees. Frank Gehry received the commission to design a performing arts center that would anchor the cultural district of the rebuilt World Trade Center. The building was supposed to open in 2015 as the crown jewel of Lower Manhattan's artistic renaissance. Gehry's initial design featured his signature curving metallic surfaces arranged around multiple theaters and performance spaces. The building would rise from the northeast corner of the site, its flowing forms creating a dramatic contrast to the geometric office towers nearby. The Performing Arts Center faced immediate problems when construction bids came in far above the projected budget. Gehry's complex geometries required custom fabrication techniques that drove costs beyond what the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation could afford. Security requirements added another layer of expense as the building needed screening areas and emergency systems that conflicted with Gehry's open design concept. Multiple redesigns attempted to reduce costs while maintaining architectural impact. Gehry simplified the exterior surfaces and reduced the number of performance venues from 4 to 2. The building's size was cut by nearly half, eliminating rehearsal spaces and educational facilities. The construction timeline was pushed back repeatedly as officials searched for additional funding sources. The center finally opened in 2023, 8 years behind schedule and dramatically smaller than originally planned. The Joyce Theater project experienced similar problems as it cycled through multiple architects and programming concepts. Originally planned as a dance-focused venue that would complement the larger Performing Arts Center, the Joyce Theater was redesigned as a more flexible performance space. The theater's size was reduced dramatically from the original 1,200-seat venue to a much smaller 250-seat space as budget constraints forced continuous compromises. Norman Foster's original design for 2 World Trade Center represented one of the most stunning architectural losses in the entire reconstruction process. Foster's Crystalline Tower featured a faceted glass exterior that would have created constantly changing reflections as sunlight moved across its surfaces throughout the day. The building's geometric form was derived from rotating 2 squares at different angles, creating a complex but mathematically precise shape that would have stood as a masterpiece of contemporary architecture. Foster's design advanced through multiple phases of development with detailed engineering studies and wind tunnel testing that proved the building's structural feasibility. The Crystalline Tower received approval from city planning agencies and generated enthusiasm from architecture critics who praised its innovative approach to office building design. However, the 2008 financial crisis eliminated demand for speculative office construction just as the building was ready to begin construction. Larry Silverstein could not find tenants willing to commit to leasing space in the unconventional tower, forcing him to abandon Foster's design entirely. The financial crisis killed several other planned residential and hotel projects on sites adjacent to the World Trade Center complex. A luxury residential tower designed for the former Deutsche Bank building site was canceled when financing disappeared and potential buyers fled the high-end real estate market. Hotel projects that would have served business travelers visiting the rebuilt World Trade Center were postponed indefinitely as the hospitality industry contracted during the recession. The original retail vision for underground shopping was dramatically reduced due to security and cost concerns. Early plans called for extensive underground retail corridors that would connect the Memorial Plaza to surrounding subway stations and office buildings. These shopping areas would have recreated the mall that existed in the original World Trade Center while expanding it to serve the broader Lower Manhattan community. However, security experts determined that underground retail spaces would be difficult to monitor and evacuate in emergency situations. The complex ventilation and egress systems required for underground commercial space also proved too expensive to justify given uncertain retail demand in the area. The planned 5 World Trade Center office tower existed only on paper for over a decade as developers struggled to find a viable use for the site. The building was originally conceived as a conventional office tower that would provide additional commercial space to complement the other rebuilt structures. However, changing market demands in Lower Manhattan made speculative office construction increasingly risky during the 2010s. The rise of remote work and companies' preferences for flexible leasing arrangements reduced demand for traditional office space. By 2020, Silverstein Properties and Brookfield chose the 5WTC site for residential development as Lower Manhattan's population continued growing, but the residential tower remains on hold awaiting favorable market condition. The Greek Orthodox Church project faced years of delays and nearly disappeared entirely due to funding issues. The original St. Nicholas Church had been destroyed when the South Tower collapsed, and the Greek Orthodox community was promised a new church as part of the reconstruction. However, the project became mired in disputes over construction costs, design changes, and funding responsibility. Construction stopped and started repeatedly as different funding sources were identified, and then lost due to bureaucratic complications. By 2025, nearly half of the originally planned structures had been canceled, redesigned, or indefinitely postponed. These cancellations represent the most significant aspect of the World Trade Center reconstruction that receives the least public attention, yet they define the project's character more than the buildings that were actually built. The pattern of ambitious plans, followed by quiet cancellations, reveals how one person's contractual obligations ultimately shaped the entire site more than any master plan ever could. Larry Silverstein's endless battle. That single developer was Larry Silverstein, who had signed his 99-year lease for the World Trade Center on July 24, 2001, exactly 6 weeks before the September 11 attacks destroyed the buildings he had just committed to control. The lease agreement bound Silverstein Properties to pay approximately $10 million monthly to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey regardless of whether the buildings existed or generated rental income. This timing created one of the most extraordinary situations in American real estate history, placing a single developer at the center of the nation's most important reconstruction project while simultaneously threatening his company with financial ruin. The lease terms had been negotiated during the late 1990s when the World Trade Center was fully occupied and generating steady rental income from major corporate tenants. Silverstein had agreed to these payments based on projections that the buildings would continue operating normally for decades. The monthly obligation included base rent plus additional charges for maintenance, security, and capital improvements that the Port Authority had planned for the aging complex. When the towers collapsed, Silverstein found himself paying rent on buildings that no longer existed while facing the enormous cost of clearing debris and rebuilding from scratch. The lease required him to maintain insurance coverage and rebuild any structures that were damaged or destroyed. But the policies he had purchased were not designed to handle total destruction of multiple skyscrapers. The insurance companies initially offered settlements that would cover only a fraction of the replacement costs, leaving Silverstein responsible for billions of dollars in reconstruction, expenses that his company could not afford. Silverstein's legal team developed a strategy arguing that the two airplane impacts constituted separate terrorist attacks rather than a single coordinated event. This distinction was crucial because each attack would trigger separate insurance payouts under the terms of the policies. If successful, this argument would provide approximately $7 billion in insurance money instead of the $3.5 billion that insurers wanted to pay for a single occurrence. The legal battle consumed years and millions of dollars in attorney fees as insurance companies fought to limit their exposure, while Silverstein struggled to secure funding for reconstruction. The twin occurrence insurance victory in 2004 provided the funding that made the memorial and tower site swap possible in 2006. The insurance litigation created immediate tension between Silverstein's commercial interests and the community's desire for careful memorial planning. Families of September 11 victims wanted the entire site preserved as sacred ground with minimal commercial development. Community groups called for extensive public hearings and design competitions that would take years to complete. However, Silverstein's monthly lease payments created financial pressure to begin reconstruction quickly before his company went bankrupt. Every month of delay cost him $10 million in rent payments while generating no income from the empty site. This financial pressure influenced every aspect of the early reconstruction planning process. Silverstein needed to maximize the amount of office space he could build to generate rental income that would cover his lease obligations and construction loans. Memorial planners wanted to preserve the entire footprint of the original towers for commemorative purposes. These competing demands required complex negotiations that delayed the project, while Silverstein's financial obligations continued accumulating monthly regardless of progress on the site. The property swap deal negotiated in 2006 provided a partial solution by transferring control of the memorial site to the Port Authority in exchange for development rights on the remaining portions of the complex. Under this arrangement, Silverstein retained control of the future 2, 3, and 4 World Trade Center sites, while the Port Authority took responsibility for the memorial, museum, and transportation hub. The deal also restructured Silverstein's lease obligations to reflect the reduced amount of property under his control, lowering his monthly payments to a more manageable level. However, Silverstein still faced the challenge of finding tenants for speculative office construction in a location that many companies considered too risky or symbolically charged for normal business operations. The attacks had created what real estate professionals called location stigma that made it difficult to attract corporate tenants to Ground Zero. Companies worried about security risks, potential future attacks, and the emotional burden of working at the site where nearly 3,000 people had died. These concerns made it nearly impossible to pre-lease office space, forcing Silverstein to build towers without guaranteed tenants. The changing office market during the 2010s and 2020s made Silverstein's original reconstruction plans increasingly obsolete as companies shifted toward flexible leasing arrangements and remote work options. The rise of technology companies changed tenant preferences for office layouts, favoring open collaborative spaces over the traditional floor plates that Silverstein's architects had designed. Companies also began preferring shorter lease terms and smaller footprints, making it difficult to justify constructing large speculative office buildings without committed anchor tenants. These market changes forced Silverstein to repeatedly redesign his planned buildings to match evolving tenant demands rather than following his original vision for the site. The design for 2 World Trade Center went through multiple architects and concepts as Silverstein searched for a building type that would attract tenants in the changing market. Norman Foster's original crystalline design was abandoned when media companies that had expressed interest decided against relocating to Lower Manhattan. Subsequent designs by other architects attempted to accommodate different types of tenants, but faced similar problems attracting committed occupants. The developers struggled to secure tenants reflected broader challenges in the Lower Manhattan office market, where companies often preferred locations in Midtown Manhattan despite higher rents. Midtown offered easier access to residential areas in the Upper East Side, North Jersey, Long Island, Westchester, and Connecticut, where many executives live. The costs of relocating to new office space also discouraged companies from moving to the rebuilt World Trade Center, even when Silverstein offered competitive lease rates. By 2025, Silverstein's empire at the World Trade Center was finally nearing completion, but looked completely different from his original plans developed in 2001. The buildings that were constructed reflected decades of compromises with market realities, security requirements, and community demands rather than any coherent architectural vision. What emerged was a collection of individual development projects driven more by contractual obligations and financial necessity than by urban planning principles. Yet even as Silverstein battled these commercial challenges, another struggle was taking place over whether the site would include any memorial at all. The memorial that almost wasn't. Early political leaders and Port Authority officials urged commercial reconstruction that would place new office towers directly on the original footprints where the Twin Towers had stood. This approach would have maximized the rentable square footage that Larry Silverstein needed to pay his lease obligations while providing symbolic recognition of the tragedy through plaques, gardens, or other modest commemorative features. Government officials supported commercial reconstruction because they wanted to demonstrate that terrorism could not destroy American capitalism. Rebuilding office towers on the exact footprints would send a powerful message that the attacks had failed to permanently damage New York's financial district. Early architectural proposals showed new office towers rising from the exact locations where the North and South Towers had collapsed. These designs featured ground-floor lobbies with memorial walls listing victims' names, small reflecting pools in adjacent plazas, and perhaps a chapel or meditation room within the commercial buildings. The memorial elements would occupy maybe 1 or 2 floors out of 50 or 60 stories of office space. Real estate developers argued this approach honored the victims, while acknowledging the practical reality that Lower Manhattan needed office buildings to remain economically viable. The families of September 11 victims launched a grassroots campaign in 2002 that completely changed these plans by demanding that the entire footprint area be preserved for memorial use. Monica Eichen, whose husband Michael died in the South Tower, founded September's mission to advocate for a proper memorial. Beverly Eckert, who lost her husband Sean in the North Tower, organized other families to lobby politicians and attend public meetings. These women and dozens of other family members argued that building offices where their loved ones died would desecrate sacred ground and dishonor the memory of nearly 3,000 victims. The families organized letter-writing campaigns, protest rallies, and media appearances that generated enormous public support for their position. They testified at public hearings that the footprint should remain empty as a permanent reminder of what was lost on September 11. Family members described visiting the site and feeling the spiritual presence of their relatives in those specific locations. Building offices, they would be equivalent to constructing a shopping mall over Arlington Cemetery or a parking garage on the Gettysburg battlefield. The emotional power of their arguments gradually shifted public opinion against commercial development within the tower footprints. Political pressure from the families eventually forced officials to abandon plans for rebuilding offices on the original tower locations. Governor George Pataki announced in 2002 that the footprints would be preserved for memorial purposes only, ending months of debate about commercial versus commemorative use of those specific areas. This decision cost millions of dollars in potential rental income, but responded to the overwhelming sentiment that some places were too sacred for ordinary commercial development. The compromise preserved the footprints for memorial use while allowing office construction on other portions of the 16-acre site. The design competition for the memorial attracted over 5,000 submissions from around the world, reflecting the global impact of the tragedy and the widespread desire to create a fitting tribute. Michael Arad and landscape architect Peter Walker's Reflecting Absence design was selected in January 2004. The design featured 2 square reflecting pools placed within the exact footprints of the original towers. The pools would be surrounded by bronze parapets inscribed with the names of all victims arranged according to relationships and meaningful connections rather than alphabetical order. Water would flow continuously over the edges of the pools and disappear into central voids, creating the impression of absence and loss. Constructing the reflecting pools within the original foundation slurry wall presented enormous technical challenges that required innovative engineering solutions. The slurry wall had been built during the 1960s to keep Hudson River water out of the World Trade Center's foundation excavation. This concrete barrier remained structurally sound after the attacks, but was never designed to support reflecting pools with continuous water circulation. Engineers needed to waterproof the pools while maintaining the structural integrity of the existing foundation system, as documented in NIST reports on the reconstruction process. The water circulation system required massive pumps and filtration equipment installed below ground level to maintain proper water quality and flow rates. Each pool contains approximately 200,000 gallons of water that must be constantly circulated, filtered, and temperature controlled to prevent algae growth and freezing during winter months. The mechanical systems occupy enormous underground vaults that had to be excavated and constructed within the confined space of the existing foundation walls. Installing these systems required careful coordination with subway tunnels, utility lines, and other underground infrastructure. The Memorial Plaza design evolved significantly as security concerns emerged during the planning process. Plans shifted from an open public park with unrestricted access to controlled access points with visitor screening procedures. Security experts determined that the memorial could become a target for future attacks and required these protective measures. Designing security features that did not detract from the memorial's contemplative atmosphere became a major challenge for architects and planners. The addition of the museum below ground created additional complications and construction delays that nearly doubled the project's timeline and budget. The museum required extensive excavation beneath the Memorial Plaza to create exhibition spaces for artifacts from September 11. This underground construction had to be coordinated with the reflecting pools above while avoiding damage to the historic slurry wall and existing subway infrastructure. The annual skylight opening ceremony that had been planned was canceled due to technical issues with the memorial systems. By 2025, the memorial had become one of New York's most visited sites, attracting over 6 million visitors annually and validating the family's original vision for preserving the tower footprints as sacred space. The success of the memorial demonstrated how community advocacy could reshape major urban development projects, but it also highlighted the enormous costs and technical complexities involved in creating meaningful public spaces. While the memorial achieved its emotional and symbolic goals, other elements of the reconstruction would face even greater challenges in balancing architectural ambition with practical constraints and budget reality. Santiago, Calatrava's expensive masterpiece. Santiago Calatrava's transportation hub represents the most controversial single structure in the entire World Trade Center reconstruction, with costs ballooning from an original budget of $2 billion to over $4 billion by completion. This massive cost overrun made the project a lightning rod for criticism about government spending and architectural excess. Yet the building that emerged became one of the most recognizable structures in the rebuilt complex. The financial disaster surrounding its construction tells the story of what happens when ambitious architectural vision collides with practical engineering realities and political oversight. Calatrava conceived the Oculus as a symbol of rebirth rising from the ashes of September 11, with its distinctive white steel ribs arranged in a bird-like form that would contrast with the geometric office towers surrounding the transportation hub. The Spanish architect's vision emphasized organic forms that would transform a utilitarian transportation facility into a sacred space that honored the victims while celebrating renewal and hope. The building's interior space was designed to flood with natural light through a central skylight that would open annually on September 11 for exactly 102 minutes, matching the duration between the first plane impact and the collapse of the North Tower. The structure's complex geometry required custom engineering solutions that had never been attempted at this scale in a transportation facility. Each of the building's steel ribs follows a unique curved path that required individual fabrication rather than mass production of identical components. The ribs are arranged in a precise mathematical pattern that creates the organic appearance while providing structural support for the enormous open interior space. Engineering consultants had to develop new computer modeling techniques to analyze the forces acting on each element of the complex three-dimensional framework. The white painted steel finish specified by Calatrava demanded specialized coating processes that would maintain the building's pristine appearance in the harsh urban environment of Lower Manhattan. The steel components required multiple layers of primer and finish coats applied under controlled factory conditions before installation. Each rib needed individual quality control testing to ensure the coating would not chip, fade, or corrode over the building's expected lifespan. The maintenance requirements for preserving the white finish added ongoing operational costs that were not fully anticipated during the planning phase. Construction delays mounted as contractors struggled to fabricate and install the building's complex components within the confined urban site. The transportation hub had to be built while maintaining service on multiple subway lines and the PATH train system that connects Manhattan to New Jersey. This requirement meant that construction could only proceed during limited overnight windows when train service was suspended. The complex coordination between different rail systems, construction activities, and pedestrian access created logistical challenges that extended the construction timeline far beyond original projection. The famous movable skylight became emblematic of the project's technical problems when it malfunctioned and was permanently closed after a few years of operation. The mechanism, designed to open the skylight annually on September 11, required precision hydraulic systems that could handle the enormous weight of the steel and glass components. But the complex geometry made reliable operation impossible. The skylight remains permanently closed, eliminating the symbolic function that had been central to Calatrava's original concept, and serving only as a source of natural light rather than the moving memorial element it was designed to be. Media coverage of the cost overruns and technical failures made the transportation hub a symbol of government waste and architectural excess that overshadowed its intended message of renewal. Newspaper editorials criticized the project as an example of politicians allowing architects to pursue personal artistic visions at taxpayer expense. The building was frequently compared to other notorious government construction projects that had exceeded their budgets while failing to meet basic functional requirements. Critics argued that a simple underground pedestrian concourse could have served the same transportation function at a fraction of the cost. The Port Authority faced intense scrutiny from federal and state oversight agencies, investigating how the project's costs had spiraled so far beyond original estimates. Audits revealed poor project management, inadequate cost controls, and insufficient oversight of design changes that added millions of dollars to the construction budget. The agency was forced to implement new procedures for managing large capital projects to prevent similar cost overruns in future construction. Several executives involved in the project resigned or were reassigned, as politicians demanded accountability for the financial disaster. Despite the criticism and cost overruns, the completed transportation hub successfully integrated multiple subway lines and PATH trains in a single elegant space that dramatically improved the pedestrian experience at the World Trade Center. The building connects the 1, R, and W subway lines with the PATH system through a network of underground passages that eliminate the need for travelers to navigate street-level intersections. The central hall provides clear sight lines and intuitive wayfinding that help visitors understand the complex transportation connections without confusion. The retail component within the Oculus, operated as a Westfield shopping center, became a successful commercial destination that generates significant revenue for the Port Authority. The mall contains over 100 stores and restaurants arranged around the dramatic central space in a way that takes advantage of the building's architectural feature. Retail sales exceeded projections as the shopping center attracted both commuters and tourists who came specifically to experience the building's unique architecture. The commercial success helped offset some of the construction cost overruns by providing ongoing rental income. By 2025, public opinion had largely shifted to appreciate the building's architectural significance despite the initial criticism of its cost and functionality. Architecture critics, who had initially dismissed the project as an expensive folly, began recognizing its contribution to the rebuilt World Trade Center complex. The Oculus became one of the most photographed and recognizable buildings in the complex, featured in countless social media posts and travel guides as a must-see destination in Lower Manhattan. Its distinctive exterior form created a new landmark that helped establish the rebuilt World Trade Center as an architectural destination rather than just a memorial site. While Calatrava's expensive masterpiece dominated headlines with its cost overruns and technical problems, other elements of the reconstruction were quietly achieving the practical success that had eluded so many of the more ambitious projects. The towers that finally rose, 4 World Trade Center and 3 World Trade Center, proved that the site could function as a normal business district rather than just a memorial location. These buildings succeeded where others failed by prioritizing practical tenant needs over architectural symbolism or political messaging. Their success provided the foundation for Lower Manhattan's broader economic revival and demonstrated that office workers would return to ground zero if the buildings met their actual requirements. Fumihiko Maki designed 4 World Trade Center as a 72-story office tower that opened on November 13, 2013, as the first major building completed in the reconstructed complex. The Japanese architect approached the project with methodical attention to the details that matter most to corporate tenants. The building's floor plates measure approximately 42,000 square feet, large enough to accommodate major companies, but not so large that smaller tenants would be overwhelmed by unused space. Each floor offers flexible layouts that can be subdivided for different tenant requirements without compromising the building's overall efficiency or aesthetic appeal. The tower's exterior consists of a prismatic glass facade that maximizes natural light penetration while providing clear views of Manhattan and the surrounding waterways. Maki arranged the building's form as a series of geometric planes that catch sunlight at different angles throughout the day, creating visual interest without relying on expensive curved surfaces or complex structural systems. The building's base incorporates retail space and public plazas that connect to the memorial area and transportation hub, making it easy for tenants and visitors to move between different parts of the reconstructed complex. Security requirements that had complicated other buildings were integrated seamlessly into 4 World Trade Centers' design without creating the fortress-like appearance that characterized some earlier reconstruction efforts. The building includes multiple egress routes, enhanced fireproofing systems, and structural redundancy that exceeds standard building codes without making these features visible to casual observers. Loading docks, mechanical systems, and security checkpoints were positioned to minimize their impact on street-level pedestrian activity while maintaining the operational efficiency that tenants required. The building's mechanical systems incorporated sustainable design features that reduced operating costs while improving indoor air quality and temperature control. Energy-efficient lighting, advanced HVAC systems, and high-performance windows helped achieve LEED Gold certification while keeping utility expenses below market averages. These features appealed to corporate tenants who were increasingly focused on environmental responsibility and long-term operational saving. Major tenants began signing leases before construction was completed, and the building achieved full occupancy within 2 years of opening, faster than most other new office towers in Manhattan during the same period. This success attracted additional companies to the World Trade Center area and helped establish rental rates that were competitive with Midtown Manhattan despite the site's complicated history. Richard Rogers approached 3 World Trade Center with a completely different architectural strategy that emphasized the building's structural system as a design element. The 80-story tower features a distinctive diamond-shaped pattern created by external steel bracing that provides both structural support and visual identity. This system allows for column-free interior spaces that give tenants maximum flexibility in arranging their office layouts, while reducing the amount of structural steel required inside the building, creating more usable floor area and lower construction costs. The building's facade combines the structural diamond pattern with high-performance glass that provides excellent thermal performance while maintaining transparency from interior spaces. Rogers positioned the mechanical systems to minimize their visual impact while maximizing their efficiency. The buildings form tapers as it rises, creating smaller floor plates on upper levels that command premium rents while maintaining efficient proportions throughout the structure. Construction of 3 World Trade Center incorporated lessons learned from the earlier buildings in the complex, allowing the project to avoid many of the delays and cost overruns that had plagued other structures. The building opened on June 11, 2018, with anchor tenants including Spotify and McKinsey & Company already committed to long-term leases. These high-profile tenants helped establish the building's reputation as a premium business address and attracted additional companies that wanted to associate with successful brands. Both towers succeeded by focusing on practical considerations that other reconstruction projects had sometimes overlooked in favor of symbolic or political goals. The buildings provided efficient floor plates, reliable mechanical systems, competitive rental rates, and convenient access to transportation networks. These basic requirements appealed to corporate decision-makers who needed functional office space more than architectural statement. The towers also benefited from their proximity to the memorial and transportation hub, without being directly associated with the most emotionally charged aspects of the site. The success of these buildings attracted major corporate tenants back to Lower Manhattan after many companies had relocated to Midtown or other areas following the September 11 attacks. Financial services firms, media companies, technology startups, and consulting companies signed leases that brought thousands of workers back to the World Trade Center area. This influx of employees supported restaurants, shops, and service businesses that made the neighborhood more attractive for both residents and additional office tenants. The economic impact of the 2 towers extended beyond their immediate rental income to support broader redevelopment throughout Lower Manhattan. Property values increased in the surrounding area as the towers proved that the World Trade Center site could once again support successful commercial development. New residential buildings, hotels, and retail projects followed as developers recognized that the area had regained its economic viability. By 2025, both 4 World Trade Center and 3 World Trade Center had waiting lists for office space as demand exceeded the available supply. Rental rates had increased to levels comparable with prime Midtown locations, validating the economic assumptions that had justified the entire reconstruction effort. The building's success proved that the World Trade Center site could function as both a memorial to September 11 and a thriving business district. Yet even as these towers demonstrated the viability of the rebuilt complex, one prominent corner of the site remained conspicuously empty, serving as a reminder of all the plans that had never materialized. The tower that may never be. The 2 World Trade Center site at the corner of Greenwich and Vesey Streets represents the most visible symbol of the reconstruction's unfinished business. This 1.2-acre plot contains only a completed foundation cube that was finished in 2013, but has remained undeveloped for over a decade. The site currently functions as a construction staging area with temporary fencing and equipment storage. But no actual building construction has begun despite multiple groundbreaking ceremonies and design announcements over the years. The tower's design history reads like a catalog of architectural false starts and changing market conditions. Since 2006, 3 major design concepts have been developed for the site, each reflecting the priorities and market assumptions of their particular moment. Norman Foster created a crystalline 78-story tower in 2006 that featured a faceted glass exterior and diamond-shaped crown. But Larry Silverstein could not find corporate tenants willing to commit to leasing space in the unconventional building. The tower's unique geometry created floor plates that many companies considered too irregular for efficient office layouts, forcing Silverstein to abandon the design despite its architectural merit. Bjarke Ingels Group received the commission to redesign 2 World Trade Center in 2015, with the specific goal of attracting media companies as anchor tenants. The Danish architect developed a cantilevered terrace concept that stacked 4 distinct building blocks designed to appeal to 21st-century Fox and News Corp. Each block would house different types of media companies, with floor plates sized to match their operational requirements for television studios, newsrooms, and administrative offices. The building's exterior would feature a pixelated facade that referenced digital media, while providing outdoor terraces that media companies increasingly demanded for their employees. The media-focused design progressed through detailed programming studies that matched specific floor areas to the operational requirements of the two companies. Construction documents were being prepared when both News Corp and 21st Century Fox decided against relocating to Lower Manhattan, citing concerns about employee commutes and production facility availability. The collapse of these tenant commitments left Silverstein with another completed design, but no committed occupants to justify beginning construction. Foster returned to the project with a third design that attempted to reflect changing patterns in office work and corporate real estate strategies. The current 62-story, 1,230-foot design features stepped setbacks on the eastern elevation and staggered loggias on the western face that provide 12,000 square feet of landscaped outdoor space. This revised approach incorporates sustainability features and advanced building systems that reflect evolving environmental standards and tenant expectations for flexible floor plates that can adapt to different requirements. The updated Foster design includes energy-efficient mechanical systems, high-performance facades, and smart building technologies integrated to attract companies focused on reducing their environmental impact. The building's structural system was designed to accommodate future changes in office layout and technology requirements that had become increasingly important to corporate tenants. However, the fundamental challenge remains unchanged: securing an anchor tenant willing to commit to leasing significant portions of the building. Silverstein's lease obligations with the Port Authority require him to eventually construct an office building on the site, creating ongoing financial pressure to find a viable development strategy. The lease includes specific requirements for the amount and type of construction that must be completed within certain timeframes. Failure to meet these obligations could result in financial penalties or loss of development rights that would eliminate Silverstein's control over the site. These contractual requirements mean that some version of WorldTradeCenter must eventually be built regardless of market conditions. The developer has been searching for an anchor tenant for more than a decade, approaching major corporations and government agencies that might be willing to commit to leasing significant portions of the building. American Express was reportedly considered as a potential anchor tenant, though no agreement was reached. The lack of committed tenants makes it impossible for Silverstein to secure construction financing or establish a realistic timeline for beginning work on the site. The challenges facing WorldTradeCenter reflect broader changes in office market dynamics that have made speculative construction increasingly difficult in Lower Manhattan. Companies have shifted toward shorter lease terms and smaller footprints while demanding more flexible space configurations. The rise of remote work has reduced many companies' requirements for traditional office space while changing their preferences for building features and layout. These market shifts have made it even more challenging to secure the long-term tenant commitments that large office developments require. Silverstein's 2024 withdrawal of his federal loan application for the project highlighted the ongoing uncertainty surrounding the tower's future. Without committed tenants or confirmed financing, the project remains indefinitely postponed despite the completed foundation and multiple refined designs. The empty site serves as a daily reminder that even the most carefully planned urban development projects must adapt to market realities that can change dramatically over extended timeframes. By 2025, the WorldTradeCenter site remained a construction staging area rather than an active building project. The undeveloped plot has become emblematic of the compromises and setbacks that define the entire reconstruction process, demonstrating how complex urban development projects must navigate changing circumstances that extend far beyond their original timeline. This single empty corner represents all the market challenges and political complications that made the rebuilding effort far more difficult than originally anticipated. Yet while this prominent site remained undeveloped, the broader transformation of Lower Manhattan had succeeded in ways that nobody could have predicted when Reconstruction planning began. Lower Manhattan's unexpected renaissance. The residential population explosion tells the real story of the Reconstruction's impact. Lower Manhattan's residential population has tripled since 2001, growing from fewer than 25,000 people living south of Chambers Street to over 75,000 residents by 2025. Before September 11, the area functioned primarily as a business district that emptied completely after office hours. This demographic shift represents one of the most dramatic urban transformations in American history, fundamentally changing the character of Manhattan's oldest district into a thriving neighborhood that operates around the clock. The World Trade Center reconstruction served as the catalyst for this broader neighborhood transformation, attracting billions of dollars in additional investment that extended far beyond the 16-acre memorial site. Real estate developers recognized that the massive government spending on rebuilding Ground Zero would improve the entire area's infrastructure and reputation, making residential development financially viable for the first time in decades. The reconstruction project upgraded subway stations, improved street lighting, enhanced security systems, and created new public spaces that made the neighborhood more attractive to potential residents who had previously avoided the area. Major residential conversions followed this infrastructure investment, with developers transforming former office buildings into residential spaces throughout the financial district. The conversion of 222 Broadway created 798 residential units in a building that had previously housed only offices, demonstrating the market demand for downtown living. S&P Global's former headquarters at 55 Water Street was similarly converted to residential use, adding hundreds more apartments to the neighborhood's housing stock. These conversions proved more economical than new construction while preserving the area's historic architecture. New residential towers began appearing throughout Lower Manhattan as developers capitalized on the improved infrastructure and changing neighborhood dynamics. Battery Park City expanded with luxury high-rise buildings that offered river views and proximity to the rebuilt World Trade Center. The South Street Seaport area added residential projects that created thousands of residential units in previously commercial-only areas. These residential developments brought families with children to a neighborhood that had been designed exclusively for office workers and tourists. The demographic shift created demand for services that made the area more livable for people of all ages rather than just commuting professionals. New schools, playgrounds, and family services opened to serve the growing residential population. Grocery stores, pharmacies, and other daily necessities that had been absent from the area began opening to serve residents who needed more than the restaurants and bars that had traditionally catered to business travelers and office workers. Parks and cultural institutions followed the residential development, creating amenities that attracted even more residents and visitors to the area. Liberty Park opened in 2016 as an elevated public space that provided views of the memorial while offering recreational facilities for local families. The Ronald O. Perelman Performing Arts Center finally opened in 2023 after years of delays, providing cultural programming that served both residents and visitors. These additions created the community infrastructure that transformed Lower Manhattan from a business district into a complete neighborhood. The Westfield Shopping Center within the Oculus transportation hub became a major retail destination that draws visitors from across the New York metropolitan region, not just Lower Manhattan residents and office workers. The shopping center contains over 100 stores ranging from luxury boutiques to everyday retailers, creating a retail environment comparable to major shopping districts in Midtown Manhattan. The mall's dramatic architectural setting within Calatrava's sculptural building makes shopping there a tourist experience in itself, attracting visitors who come specifically to see the building and end up making purchases while they explore the space. Transportation connections improved dramatically during the Reconstruction period, making Lower Manhattan more accessible than it had been since the original subway system was built in the early 20th century. The rebuilt Fulton Street Transit Center connected multiple subway lines in a single facility with improved passenger flow and modern amenities. The PATH train service to New Jersey was restored and enhanced with new stations and rolling stock. Ferry service expanded with new routes connecting Lower Manhattan to Brooklyn, Queens, and New Jersey, providing transportation alternatives that reduced crowding on subway lines. These transportation improvements made it practical for people to live in Lower Manhattan while working in other parts of the metropolitan area, reversing the traditional pattern of people living elsewhere and commuting to Lower Manhattan for work. Residents could easily travel to jobs in Midtown Manhattan, Brooklyn, or New Jersey without the complex subway transfers that had previously made such commutes impractical. The improved transportation also made Lower Manhattan more attractive to employers who wanted to locate offices in an area with excellent regional connectivity. The success of Lower Manhattan's transformation exceeded all original projections for the area's revival. With population growth, commercial development, and real estate values all surpassing the most optimistic forecasts made during the early Reconstruction planning. Government officials had hoped that rebuilding the World Trade Center would restore the area to its pre-September 11 condition. But the actual results created a much more vibrant and diverse neighborhood than had existed before the attacks. The combination of memorial tourism, office workers, and residential population created an economic base that supported far more commercial activity than the purely business-focused district that had been destroyed. Real estate values throughout Lower Manhattan reached record highs by 2025, reflecting the increased demand for both residential and commercial space in the transformed neighborhood. The World Trade Center office node achieved a vacancy rate of 12.7%, below the broader New York market average of 13.5%, demonstrating the area's successful recovery. Apartments that would have been difficult to rent in 2001 commanded premium prices as residents competed for space in one of Manhattan's most desirable neighborhoods. The World Trade Center reconstruction succeeded not just as a memorial project, but as an urban planning experiment that would influence development projects around the world. The global lessons of Ground Zero. Urban planners from every continent studied the World Trade Center reconstruction as the most comprehensive example of disaster recovery and large-scale redevelopment in modern history. The project became required reading in urban planning programs as academics recognized that Ground Zero represented a unique laboratory for understanding how cities rebuild after traumatic events. Planning departments in London, Berlin, Madrid, and dozens of other cities sent delegations to New York to observe construction techniques, community engagement processes, and financing mechanisms that might be applicable to their own challenges. The reconstruction offered lessons that extended far beyond terrorism recovery to include natural disaster response, economic revitalization, and the integration of memorial functions with commercial development. The project demonstrated both the extraordinary possibilities and significant pitfalls of attempting large-scale urban redevelopment under intense public scrutiny and political pressure. The successful elements included the creation of new transportation infrastructure that improved regional connectivity, the development of innovative building technologies that enhanced safety and sustainability, and the transformation of Lower Manhattan from a business district into a thriving residential neighborhood. However, the reconstruction also revealed the enormous costs of attempting to balance competing stakeholder interests. The challenges of maintaining architectural vision through decades of political changes, and the difficulty of predicting market conditions over the extended timeframes required for major urban projects. The fundamental tension between memorial and commercial functions at Ground Zero became a template that influenced similar projects worldwide. Cities planning memorials at sites of tragic events studied how New York had attempted to balance sacred space with economic development needs. Memorial projects in Madrid, Mumbai, and other cities affected by terrorism adopted similar approaches to integrating commemorative elements with ongoing urban life, rather than creating isolated monuments that might become neglected over time. Public officials in cities considering major redevelopment projects studied the financing model that made the World Trade Center reconstruction possible through complex public-private partnerships. The combination of government funding for memorial and infrastructure elements with private development of commercial components influenced urban renewal projects in Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles. However, these projects also learned from the challenges that arose when public and private priorities conflicted during the World Trade Center reconstruction process. The design competition process, pioneered at Ground Zero, was copied for major projects around the world, as cities recognized the value of generating international attention and creative solutions through open competitions. London's King's Cross development adopted a similar competition structure that balanced expert judgment with community input while managing large numbers of architectural submissions. These competitions helped establish international reputations for cities, while ensuring that major projects received input from talented architects and planners worldwide. Security innovations developed for the World Trade Center complex, fundamentally changed office building design standards globally as architects and engineers recognized that traditional approaches to commercial construction were inadequate for addressing contemporary security threats. Enhanced fireproofing systems, improved emergency egress routes, and strengthened structural designs became standard requirements for major office buildings in cities around the world. Blast-resistant facade systems developed for OneWorldTradeCenter influenced building codes in London, Paris, and other cities considered potential terrorist targets. Underground retail and transportation facilities worldwide adopted security screening procedures and design features that had been pioneered during the World Trade Center reconstruction. Construction management techniques developed during the reconstruction were adopted for other megaprojects, as the construction industry recognized the innovations that had emerged from managing such a complex site. The coordination systems used to maintain subway and PATH train service during construction influenced similar projects in London, Tokyo, and other cities with complex underground infrastructure. Prefabrication techniques developed to meet the project's quality and schedule requirements were applied to major construction projects in Asia and Europe. The NIST-NCSTAR reports documenting the technical innovations and engineering solutions from the reconstruction became primary reference materials for construction professionals worldwide dealing with similar challenges. The community engagement process, despite its controversies and limitations, became a model for inclusive planning that influenced how cities approached public participation in major development projects. The multiple rounds of public hearings, design charrettes, and stakeholder meetings established new standards for community involvement in urban planning decisions. Cities in Europe and Asia adopted similar processes for engaging residents and community groups in planning decisions that would affect their neighborhoods. However, these projects also learned from the World Trade Center experience about the challenges of managing community input when stakeholder groups have fundamentally different priorities. Educational institutions worldwide incorporated the World Trade Center reconstruction into their curricula as a comprehensive case study. Rutgers University developed an entire course examining post-September 11 reconstruction planning and urban policy. NYU's Schack Institute convened a major conference in 2025, bringing together international experts to analyze the project's long-term impacts on urban planning practice. Architecture schools used the project to teach students about the challenges of designing buildings with symbolic significance while meeting practical functional requirements. Transportation hubs in European cities adopted design features pioneered in Calatrava's Oculus, with similar soaring white steel structures appearing in projects from Amsterdam to Barcelona. The distinctive architectural language of the transportation hub influenced how cities approached the design of major transit facilities, emphasizing the potential for infrastructure to serve as both functional necessity and architectural landmark. The reconstruction's influence extended beyond individual building projects to affect broader approaches to urban planning and disaster recovery. International organizations studying post-disaster reconstruction used the World Trade Center project as a primary reference for understanding how cities could rebuild after catastrophic events while incorporating lessons learned from the recovery process. The project demonstrated that successful reconstruction required balancing memorial functions with economic development needs, maintaining community engagement throughout extended planning processes, and adapting original visions to changing market conditions and political priorities. Ground Zero became not just a memorial to the victims of September 11, but a comprehensive laboratory for 21st century city building that influenced urban development practices worldwide. Yet the project's most important lesson may not have been any specific technique or innovation, but rather something more fundamental about how cities actually get built when ambitious plans encounter the messy realities of politics, economics, and human nature. The World Trade Center reconstruction's greatest achievement was not executing Daniel Libeskind's original master plan or any other single vision, but rather its ability to adapt continuously over 24 years of changing circumstances. The final complex reflects decades of negotiation and adaptation rather than Libeskind's original plan, yet it functions successfully as both memorial space and thriving business district. This represents the reconstructed site evolving through public-private compromise among families, agencies, and developers, messy, full of compromises, and often frustrating, but ultimately responsive to the actual needs of families, workers, and the broader community. By 2025, the memorial attracts over 6 million visitors annually, while the office towers achieved occupancy rates above market averages, demonstrating successful integration of memorial and commerce. Great urban projects succeed through persistent adaptation to human needs rather than rigid adherence to perfect plans.